Welcome to StoriesX, where we bring you tales that challenge, inspire, and stay with you long after the story ends. Today, we dive into a gripping saga. What would you do if a corrupt cop falsely accused you, arrested you, and then hunted you down to protect his lies? Captain Angela Pierce's relentless fight for justice will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, betrayal, and resilience. If you're ready to uncover the shocking twists in this incredible story of betrayal, resilience, and truth, hit the like button and subscribe to StoriesX, your home for captivating narratives. Let's get started. It was a warm Wednesday afternoon when Captain Angela Pierce stepped out of her unmarked police car. The late sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light across the small convenience store she often frequented. Her crisp uniform gleamed, her badge catching the sunlight, a symbol of her years of dedication to the force. Angela, one of the highest-ranking officers in her precinct, commanded attention wherever she went. A tall, confident black woman in her late 30s, her sharp gaze and composed demeanor often left no room for doubt. But today she felt a strange tension in the air as she approached the store. It wasn't uncommon for her to feel the weight of her position, but this unease was different. Brushing it aside, she pushed open the glass door, the familiar ding of the bell announcing her arrival. "Good afternoon, Captain Pierce," Mr. Patel, the elderly store owner, greeted warmly. His voice carried a subtle edge as though he too sensed the strange undercurrent in the room. "Afternoon, Mr. Patel," Angela replied with a smile, grabbing a bottle of water and a protein bar. As she approached the counter, her trained instincts picked up on something unusual. A presence lingering at the back of the store. She glanced briefly over her shoulder and noticed him. A white police officer she didn't recognize, standing rigid with arms crossed. His icy blue eyes were locked on her, his posture exuding unwarranted suspicion. Angela turned back to the counter, her heart sinking. She wasn't unfamiliar with being judged. Her career had been marked by moments like these, where her achievements were overshadowed by assumptions based solely on her skin color. After paying, she walked toward the door only to hear a voice call out sharply behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to see some identification." Angela froze mid-step, her hand on the door handle. She turned slowly, her expression neutral but her mind racing. The officer stepped forward, his name tag reading, Officer Rick Stevens. He was younger, perhaps in his early 30s, with a chiseled jaw and closely cropped blonde hair. There was a confidence in his stance that bordered on arrogance. "Is there a problem, officer?" Angela asked calmly, though her patience was already wearing thin. "I saw you acting suspiciously," Stevens said, his tone laced with condescension. "Let me see some ID." Angela blinked, disbelief washing over her. Suspiciously? She had done nothing but pick up a few items. Keeping her composure, she replied, "I'm Captain Angela Pierce of the Central City Police Department. I believe you've made a mistake." Stevens raised an eyebrow, his hand casually resting on the holster of his gun. "A captain, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "I'm going to need proof of that. Hand over your ID." Angela felt a wave of anger rise but forced it down. "Officer Stevens, I've identified myself, and unless you have probable cause, I suggest you reconsider." His eyes narrowed, and the air between them grew thick with tension. "Probable cause," Stevens sneered. "You were handling merchandise suspiciously. I think you were planning to steal." Angela's heart pounded, the accusation hitting her harder than she'd anticipated. She knew what this was, an abuse of power, a manifestation of racial prejudice. But she also knew how dangerous the situation could become if mishandled. "You're making a serious mistake," Angela said, her voice firm. "I've been a loyal servant of the law for over a decade. You'll regret this." Stevens took a step closer, his tone darkening. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for suspicion of theft." Shock rippled through her as his words hung in the air. Angela's mind raced, calculating her options. She could challenge him, but she knew the risk. He was armed and clearly fueled by prejudice. Reluctantly, Angela turned and placed her hands behind her back, the cold metal of the handcuffs snapping against her wrists. The humiliation was sharp and bitter. As Stevens led her out of the store, The weight of her situation bore down on her. The stares of bystanders burned into her, their phones raised to capture the surreal image of a black police captain being led away by one of her own. Angela held her head high, refusing to let him see her break. Inside her, a fire ignited, not just to clear her name but to confront the rot of racism that had tainted her career and now threatened her dignity. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been unjustly accused, for every person judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. This was just the beginning, and Angela Pierce wasn't going down without a fight. The precinct buzzed with its usual chaos, phones ringing, officers chatting, and radios crackling with incoming calls. But all of it seemed to fall silent as Captain Angela Pierce was led through the front entrance in handcuffs. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and a thick wave of disbelief washed over the room. "Is that Captain Pierce?" one officer murmured, his voice tinged with confusion. "What's going on?" Another whispered, her brows furrowed in shock. Angela walked with her head held high, refusing to let the humiliation show on her face. Her sharp, confident strides contrasted with the smug satisfaction plastered across Officer Stevens's face as he marched her toward the booking desk. She could feel the weight of every gaze, their surprise mingled with doubt and curiosity. Some knew her well, knew her integrity, and their confusion was evident. Others, like Stevens, had always harbored quiet resentment toward her authority. At the booking desk, Officer Reynolds, an older, gruff man with years of experience etched into the lines on his face, looked up from his paperwork. His eyes widened in disbelief when he saw who stood before him. "Captain Pierce?" Reynolds said, his voice filled with concern. "What in the world is this about?" "She's under arrest," Stevens interjected smugly, slamming a stack of paperwork onto the desk. "Caught her red-handed trying to steal from Patel's store." Angela felt a wave of anger and disbelief. The blatant lie was almost too much to bear. She locked eyes with Reynolds, who seemed hesitant, his hands frozen over the papers. "Reynolds," Angela said, her voice steady despite the fire raging inside her. "You've known me for years. Do I look like someone who would steal anything, let alone from a neighborhood store?" Reynolds' eyes darted between Angela and Stevens. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, his brow furrowed. "Why would Captain Pierce—" "Because criminals come in all shapes and sizes," Stevens snapped, cutting him off. "Even ones with badges." Angela's jaw tightened as she fought to maintain her composure. "Reynolds, think about this. Does this sound right to you? Stevens is lying." Reynolds hesitated, clearly torn between his duty and his doubt. "Look," he said finally, his voice heavy. "I have to follow protocol. Let's get this processed, and then we can sort it out." Angela bit back her frustration as Reynolds pulled out the fingerprinting kit. She extended her hands reluctantly, her fingers pressing into the cold ink pad. The humiliation of the process cut deep. She had booked countless suspects at this very desk. Now, she was the one leaving her fingerprints behind. As Reynolds moved to take her mugshot, Angela straightened her shoulders and stared directly into the camera. The flash illuminated her face, capturing an expression of defiance and determination. She wouldn't let this break her. "Captain," Reynolds said quietly, his tone almost apologetic, "we'll have to hold you in a cell until we can sort this out." Angela nodded, though the weight of the words stung. "Do what you have to do," she replied, her voice firm but calm. "I'm not staying in there long." Stevens smirked from the corner, leaning casually against the wall. "Don't get too comfortable, Captain. You're going to be here for a while." Angela shot him a glare, her mind racing with strategies to dismantle his web of lies. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about exposing Stevens for what he truly was, a racist, power-hungry officer abusing his position to tear her down. As Reynolds led her down the cold, dimly lit hallway toward the holding cells, Angela's resolve hardened. Each step echoed ominously in the silence, amplifying the weight of the situation. She passed officers she had worked alongside for years, their eyes filled with confusion and unease. She wanted to scream at them, to demand they see through the lies, but she stayed silent, her determination burning brighter with every step. When they reached the cell, Reynolds unlocked the door and gestured for her to step inside. Angela hesitated for a moment, taking in the cold, barren space. A narrow bench lined one wall, and a small toilet sat in the corner. She turned to Reynolds, who avoided her gaze as he closed the door behind her with a metallic clang. Alone in the cell, Angela sank onto the bench, her mind racing. She couldn't let Stevens win. She had to find a way to prove her innocence, to reveal the truth behind his actions. The humiliation of this moment would only fuel her fight. As the hours dragged on, the sounds of the precinct buzzed faintly in the background. Angela's mind replayed the events at the store, searching for any detail that could help her case. The way Stevens had watched her, his immediate accusation, the cashier's nervous demeanor, it all pointed to a setup. But why? What did Stevens hope to gain by targeting her so blatantly? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. She sat up, her pulse quickening as a familiar voice called out. Where is she? It was Lieutenant Hayes, her direct superior. Angela felt a flicker of hope. Hayes was tough but fair, someone who valued the truth above all else. Back here, Reynolds replied, his voice muffled but steady. Seconds later, Hayes appeared in front of her cell, her sharp blue eyes scanning Angela's face. What the hell is going on here, Pierce? She asked, her tone hard to read. Angela met her gaze, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Lieutenant, I've been set up. Stevens is framing me, and I need your help to prove it. Hayes studied her for a moment, then turned to Reynolds. Get her out of there, she ordered. Reynolds hesitated. But now, Hayes snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. As the cell door swung open, Angela stepped out, her head held high. The fight was far from over, but she wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Angela sat across from Lieutenant Hayes in a small interrogation room, a place she had rarely occupied in her career. Hayes had just pulled Angela from the cell, but the atmosphere between them remained tense. The room's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a stark glow over the steel table between them. Pierce, Hayes began, her tone sharp but measured. You're claiming Stevens set you up. I need to know everything, every detail. Angela nodded, steadying her breath. It started at Patel's store. I was grabbing a snack like I've done 100 times. Stevens showed up out of nowhere, watching me like I was some kind of suspect. Then out of the blue, he accuses me of shoplifting. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't hear it. He was determined to arrest me. Hayes leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Why do you think he targeted you? Stevens may be an ass, but he's never pulled something this blatant. Angela met her gaze. Because I'm a black woman in a position of authority he doesn't think I deserve. This isn't just about me, Lieutenant. It's about him trying to tear down everything I've built. Hayes' eyes narrowed as she considered Angela's words. You've got a point. Stevens has always been on thin ice with me. His arrogance, his lack of respect for protocol. But this is a whole new level. Do you have anything concrete? Witnesses? Evidence? Angela's mind raced. Mr. Patel looked scared, almost like he knew something but didn't want to say it. And then there's the security footage. If we can get the unedited version, it'll show I didn't steal anything. Hayes nodded slowly. All right, I'll pull the footage myself. But we need more than that. If Stevens is setting you up, he's not working alone. He's too sloppy to pull this off without help. At that moment, the door to the interrogation room creaked open, and Marcus stepped inside. Angela felt a wave of relief at the sight of her trusted partner. Marcus was a solid cop, sharp, dependable, and fiercely loyal. I heard what happened, Marcus said, his voice tinged with frustration. This whole thing stinks, Lieutenant. Stevens has been gunning for Angela for years. This is just him finally acting on it. Hayes gestured for Marcus to sit. We were just discussing how to move forward. Do you have anything that could help? Marcus pulled out a folder and set it on the table. I've been digging into Stevens' records. He's got a history of complaints. Excessive force, racial profiling, insubordination. Most of it's been swept under the rug, but there's a pattern. Hayes flipped through the folder, her expression growing darker with each page. This paints a damning picture, but it's not enough to clear Pierce. We need direct evidence tying him to this setup. Angela leaned forward. What about the jewelry store clerk? If Stevens pressured Patel into filing a false report, we need him to admit it. Marcus nodded. I can go talk to him. If he's scared enough, he might crack. No, Angela interjected. I need to be there. Patel knows me, and he might feel safer coming clean if I'm the one asking. Hayes hesitated. It's risky. If Stevens catches wind of this, he could double down. Angela's jaw tightened. I'm willing to take that risk. I'm not going to let him destroy my reputation. After a moment, Hayes relented. Fine, but you need to be careful. Marcus, you go with her. Keep an eye on things. The small jewelry store felt more claustrophobic than usual when Angela and Marcus arrived. The bell above the door chimed softly as they stepped inside, and Mr. Patel looked up from behind the counter. His eyes widened in alarm when he saw Angela. Captain Pierce, he stammered, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. I thought... Angela held up a hand to calm him. Mr. Patel, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk. Patel glanced nervously at Marcus, then back at Angela. I already told the police everything I know. Angela stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. And I think there's more to the story. Please, Mr. Patel, I need the truth. Did Stevens pressure you into filing that report? Patel's face paled and he looked down at the counter, avoiding her gaze. I didn't want to, he whispered. He came in last week, said I had to report a bracelet missing, said it was important. Angela's heart sank. And you did it because you were scared. Patel nodded, his shoulders slumping. He said if I didn't, he'd make things difficult for me. I didn't know he was going to do this to you, Captain, I swear. Angela exchanged a glance with Marcus. This was the break they needed. We'll need you to make an official statement, Marcus said, his voice firm. This could be the key to stopping him. Patel hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. If I do, he'll come after me. Angela reached out, placing a reassuring hand on the counter. We'll protect you, Mr. Patel, but I need you to be brave, please. After a long pause, Patel nodded. All right, I'll do it. Back at the precinct, Hayes reviewed Patel's statement with a grim expression. This is good, but it's still not enough. We need that footage. Marcus looked up from his phone. I've been working on that. The original security tape is missing from evidence, but I've got a lead. It might be at Stevens's house. Angela's eyes narrowed. Then that's where we're going. Hayes frowned. You're walking into dangerous territory. If Stevens catches you... Angela cut her off. I don't care. He's already taken everything from me. I'm not letting him win. Hayes sighed, then nodded. All right, but be careful, and bring back something we can use. Angela and Marcus exchanged a determined look. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, they had the pieces they needed to take Stevens down. The night was still as Angela and Marcus pulled up to the quiet suburban street where Officer Stevens lived. His house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, a picture of suburban tranquility. The perfectly manicured lawn and the subtle glow from the porch light betrayed nothing of the man who lived inside. A man who had spent years abusing his power and was now trying to destroy Angela's career. Angela's stomach tightened as she glanced at Marcus, who was sitting tensely in the passenger seat. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice low but laced with concern. She nodded, her jaw set with determination. We need that footage. It's the only way to clear my name and expose him. They stepped out of the car, the night air cool against their skin. Angela adjusted her jacket, her badge tucked discreetly away to avoid drawing attention. Marcus checked the lock-picking tools in his pocket one last time before gesturing toward the side of the house. Back door, he murmured. Less chance of anyone seeing us. They crept along the side of the house, staying low and in the shadows. The faint hum of a television drifted through a slightly open window, confirming that Stevens was home. Angela's heart pounded as they reached the back door. Marcus knelt, working quickly and silently to pick the lock. Within moments, the door clicked open. They slipped inside, closing the door softly behind them. The house was eerily quiet, save for the muffled sound of a news anchor droning on in the living room. Angela took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. The stakes were high, and there was no room for mistakes. The office should be upstairs, Marcus whispered. Angela nodded, and they began to ascend the staircase, each step deliberate and cautious. The house felt suffocating, its shadows pressing in on them as they moved. When they reached the second floor, Angela pointed toward a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, and the faint glow of a desk lamp spilled out into the corridor. They approached it carefully, peering inside. The office was neatly organized, with shelves lined with books and a desk in the center. A laptop sat open, its screen dark but still powered on. Marcus quickly moved to the desk, booting up the laptop. Angela stood guard by the door, her ears straining for any sound of movement from downstairs. "Hurry," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying," Marcus muttered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "If the footage is here, it's hidden." Angela's pulse quickened as the sound of footsteps echoed from downstairs. Stevens was moving, and he was coming closer. Marcus's voice broke through her rising panic. "Got it." He held up a small USB drive, his face tense with urgency. "This has to be the footage." "Let's go," Angela said, grabbing his arm. They slipped out of the office and back toward the staircase, moving as quickly and quietly as they could. But just as they reached the top of the stairs, a voice called out from below. "Who's there?" Angela froze, her heart pounding. Stevens' voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. A flashlight beam swept across the hallway below, illuminating the staircase. "Move!" she hissed, pushing Marcus toward the back of the house. They bolted down the hallway, adrenaline surging through their veins as Stevens' footsteps thundered up the stairs. "Stop right there!" Stevens bellowed, his flashlight catching them as they reached a window at the end of the hall. Angela threw it open, the cold night air rushing in. "Go!" she urged, helping Marcus climb through. He landed softly on the ground below, then turned to catch Angela as she followed. Stevens burst into the hallway just as Angela slipped out of sight. "You're not getting away," Stevens shouted, leaning out the window. He fired a shot, the sound reverberating through the night. Angela and Marcus ducked, the bullet striking the side of the house. "Run!" Marcus yelled, grabbing Angela's arm. They sprinted toward the cover of a nearby tree line, Stevens' shouts fading as they disappeared into the darkness. Back at Angela's apartment, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Marcus plugged the USB drive into Angela's laptop. Their breaths held as the files loaded. The first clip appeared on the screen. Unedited footage from Patel's store. Angela watched intently as the truth unfolded. The video showed her entering the store, selecting her items and paying at the register. There was no hesitation, no attempt to conceal anything. Then came the crucial moment. The footage showed Stevens entering the store after Angela, his posture tense and predatory. He lingered near the jewelry counter, his hand moving subtly before he approached Patel. The audio captured his voice clearly. "You'll say the bracelet is missing, do you understand?" Patel's voice, shaking with fear, responded. "Yes, Officer Stevens." Angela clenched her fists, a mix of anger and relief washing over her. This was it. The proof she needed. "This is damning," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. "He's done. There's no way he can talk his way out of this." Angela nodded, her determination solidifying. "We take this to Hayes, tonight, before Stevens has a chance to retaliate." At the precinct, Lieutenant Hayes watched the footage with a grim expression. When it ended, she sat back in her chair, exhaling sharply. "This is explosive," Hayes said, her tone serious. "We're not just talking about clearing your name, Pierce. This is going to shake the entire department." Angela met her gaze, her voice steady. "Then let it, and let. Stevens doesn't belong here, and neither does anyone who's been covering for him." Hayes nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "I'll take this to the chief, but you need to be prepared. Stevens won't go down without a fight." Angela stood tall, her resolve unshakable. "Neither will I." As the clock ticked toward midnight, Angela knew the hardest part was still ahead. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt hope. The truth was out, and she was ready to fight for it. Angela sat in the dimly lit conference room at the precinct, her fingers tightly gripping the edge of the table. Across from her sat Lieutenant Hayes, a laptop open between them, its screen still paused on the damning footage of Officer Stevens. Outside, the station was alive with activity. Officers rushed about, their hushed conversations charged with the weight of what was unfolding. "This is it," Hayes said quietly, her voice steady. "With this evidence, we can expose him. But Angela, you need to be ready for the fallout. This isn't just about Stevens. It's about every crack in the system he's exploited. Angela nodded, her resolve unshaken. I've spent my career fighting for justice, Hayes. I'm not stopping now. Hayes gave a tight smile, respect evident in her eyes. Let's do this. The precinct's meeting hall was filled with tension as the department gathered. Officers and administrative staff sat in rows, their murmurs dying down as Hayes stepped to the front, flanked by Angela and Marcus. Stevens stood off to the side, his arms crossed and his face a mask of defiance. The chief of police, a composed yet stern figure, presided over the proceedings. We've gathered here because serious allegations have been raised against Officer Stevens, Hayes began, her voice carrying authority. And today, we're presenting irrefutable evidence to address these claims. The room was silent as Hayes clicked the laptop, and the footage began to play on the large screen at the front of the hall. Every eye was fixed on the screen, watching as Stevens' actions unfolded. The planted evidence, his coercion of Patel, and the clear intent to frame Angela. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as the footage ended. Angela scanned the room, noting the mix of disbelief, anger, and shame on the faces of her colleagues. Stevens' expression darkened, his smug arrogance replaced with a cold fury. This is ridiculous, Stevens snapped, stepping forward. That footage is doctored. She's just trying to save her own skin. Hayes raised a hand, silencing him. The footage has been authenticated by our forensic team, Stevens. Your actions are clear, and they're indefensible. Angela stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. You didn't just try to ruin my career. You tarnished the badge we all wear. You exploited the trust placed in you to further your own prejudices and vendettas. And today, it ends. The chief stood, his face a mask of controlled anger. Officer Stevens, effective immediately, you are suspended pending an internal investigation. You will also be arrested and charged for your actions. Stevens glared at Angela, his voice a low snarl. This isn't over. But Angela met his gaze, unwavering. Yes, it is. As Stevens was escorted out of the precinct in handcuffs, a collective exhale seemed to sweep through the building. Angela stood in the hallway, watching him go. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a moment of accountability for a system that had allowed men like Stevens to thrive. Marcus approached, a proud grin on his face. You did it, Angela. We did it, she corrected, giving him a small but genuine smile. This was a team effort. Hayes joined them, her expression softer than usual. You've shaken things up, Pierce, but don't stop here. This department, and this city, needs people like you to keep fighting. Angela nodded. I intend to. That evening, Angela returned to her apartment, exhausted but triumphant. She stepped onto her balcony, looking out over the city she had sworn to protect. The night air was cool, carrying with it a sense of renewal. For the first time in days, she felt a lightness in her chest, a belief that justice could prevail, even against the deepest injustices. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Dinner on me tomorrow. You've earned it. Angela chuckled softly, replying with a simple, deal. As she leaned against the railing, she reflected on the battle she had just fought. It wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about setting a precedent, proving that no one was above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it. The stars twinkled above, a quiet reminder of the vastness of the world and the challenges still ahead. But Angela was ready. She had faced the storm and emerged stronger, her integrity intact. Justice, she realized, wasn't a single act or a final destination. It was a continuous fight, and she was more than ready to keep fighting. The story of Angela Pierce is not just one of personal vindication. It's a profound reflection on resilience, integrity, and the pursuit of justice. Angela's journey reminds us that standing up against systemic injustices requires unwavering courage, even when the odds seem insurmountable. At its core, this tale teaches that prejudice in any form corrodes the very foundation of trust and unity within a community. It shows the devastating consequences of unchecked bias and abuse of power, but also highlights the transformative power of accountability. Angela's strength in the face of adversity serves as an inspiration for anyone who has ever been wronged or marginalized, proving that persistence and truth will eventually shine through. The story also underscores the importance of allyship. Marcus and Hayes stood by Angela, providing critical support when it mattered most. Their actions highlight how collective efforts can dismantle corruption and create a fairer system for everyone. Ultimately, Angela's triumph is a call to action. It challenges each of us to confront our own biases, question injustices when we see them, and take a stand, even when it's uncomfortable. It's a reminder that justice is not just a principle to be upheld by those in uniform, but a shared responsibility for us all.